Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our Halloween special for the Arkeologisk Forskningsseminar. We are very happy that you are here. Oh, I see maybe that we have some more students coming. Hello, come in. Come in, welcome. Okay. Hello. Yes. So I think we have everyone here. So we have kind of a hybrid event. So we have people also joining on YouTube watching us. So welcome everyone, both the physical people and the ones online. We wanted to do this event in the crypt of the museum because it's very creepy, but it's closed due to construction work. So we do it here in a modern setting. But we hope that our free talks today will creep us a little bit and make you in like Halloween mood. So I will introduce our first speaker, which is Astrid Nyland. She will do her presentation in Norwegian, and it is called Møte med et mesolittisk monster. Livet etter Storeggatsunamien og 1200 år siden. Astrid is working at the Arkeologisk Museum in Stavanger, and this project is part of it is a large project called LAST, and I figure she will tell us everything about it. Welcome, Astrid.
Takk. Jeg fikk lov til å velge om jeg skulle ta det på norsk eller engelsk, så denne gangen tar jeg det på norsk. Jeg må jo si først tusen takk for invitasjonen til å komme og snakke på en Halloween en Halloween-samling. Og det er veldig, veldig stas å være tilbake på Sydneshaugen. Jeg har ikke vært her på over 20 år. Jeg studerte jo i Bergen, sammen med noen av de som sitter her bak. Var jo med og startet en sånn arkeologisk forening som het Skålgropa en gang for over 20 år siden. Så veldig, veldig stas å være tilbake i Bergen. Jeg tar utgangspunkt i det som prosjektet som jeg holder på med, som jeg fikk støtte fra Forskningsrådet til å drive med i 4 år. Så vi har holdt på i et par år nå snart. Det begynner å komme litt inn i det, men veldig masse sånne store resultater har vi ikke. Og det jeg skal presentere for dere i dag, det er litt ufordøyde tanker også, men også har jeg et lite manus, for jeg utrolig dårlig til å holde meg til historien hvis jeg ikke har et sånn strukturerende papir å holde meg til. Ellers så kunne det tatt en time plutselig, så jeg skal prøve å holde meg til den oppgitte tida. Titelen, altså Møte med et mesolittisk monster om Storeggatsunamien 8200 år siden. Det er jo ganske tydelig at jeg drar jo noen paralleller mellom en tsunami og et monster her. Man kan egentlig dra mange paralleller. Jeg holdt et litt lignende foredrag for Ukraina, for noen arkeologiske fundraising for Ukraina for noen uker siden. Og da kunne man jo også dra parallellen til krig, selvfølgelig. Så ja, man leser jo inn i det, jeg sier kanskje, det man sitter med og har i bakhodet. Men jeg vil altså begynne med å presentere denne historiens kjeltring, altså Storeggatsunamien. Og det var altså en enorm tsunami som vasket inn over vestlandskysten, Vestlandet, Nord-Norge, Skottland, Shetland, Grønland og så videre for 8200 år siden. Den ble forårsaket av det er vel det største kjente undersjøiske jordraset som man kjenner til, altså, som heter eller blir kalt for Storegga-raset. Og det raset, eller at det hadde gått et ras, og at den hadde trigget en tsunami, det ble påvist og identifisert av geologer og botanikere, 80-tallet særlig. Særlig Stein Bondevik og Sue og Alistair Dawson begynte å legge merke til et sånn lag, et avsetningslag i tjern og myrer og sånn, som da fikk samme datering over et veldig stort område. Og så begynte liksom den her, ja, hva skal vi si, man forstod at man hadde med en sånn gigantisk tsunami i Mesolittikum å gjøre. Sten Bondevik og kolleger har datert den ganske så spesifikt ut ifra noen grønn mose som blomstrer en gang om året. Det får en sånn ekstra liten vinge, den her mosen, og den har de funnet da, i mange av de her lagene. Og denne mosen den blomstrer i oktober-november, så man kan da si ganske spesifikt at tsunamien vasket inn sånn cirka 1,50 før år 0 om høsten, oktober-november. Så denne hendelsen, den vet vi at skjedde, altså den identifisert. Men så jo spørsmålet da, hvordan vi kan bruke den kunnskapen til å si noe litt mer om samfunnet som opplevde denne hendelsen. Så den mesolittiske befolkningen var jo i all hovedsak kystbundne, altså de bodde på og ved stranda. Det her skjedde altså om høsten. Det skjedde jo også mens denne klimahendelsen, 8-2-klimahendelsen, som en kuldeanomali i mellom-Mesolittikum, som gjorde at det var blitt kaldere. Kuldehendelsen var global, så enkelte steder så var det ned 6 grader. I Norge så sier hun Kikki Kleiven, som jobber på klimasenteret her, at det var kanskje 1 grad kaldere. Det var blitt kanskje tørrere, lengre vintre, men isbreene vokste jo, så kanskje hadde du da litt tidligere vinter enn da bare noen 100 år før. Så disse folka var kanskje da litt før ned fra fjellet, det var jo om høsten. De hadde lagt seg opp vinterforråd, veden var tørr, teltet var lappet, de var klar for vinteren. Winter was coming. Og så slår altså denne bølgen inn over kysten. Så for mange da, kanskje ikke alle, men særlig tenker jeg da, der dere ser det lyse rødt på det bildet, nær liksom episenteret, så var denne dagen for 8200 år siden, den dagen sjøen ble et monster. Altså en fryktelig dag. Så sånn sett så det liksom, kan man jo si at scenen for en slags monsterfilm satt. Det i alle fall utgangspunktet for det prosjektet som leder, da, som Solveig sa. Kortnavnet Life After the Storeggatsunamien, eller LAST. Og vi ser etter potensiell sosial påvirkning som da Storeggatsunamien kan ha hatt. Og det en utfordrende oppgave. Og særlig utfordrende fordi at materialet i denne perioden da ganske fragmentert på grunn av at vi har en transgresjon som har foregått, altså havnivåendringer, og et arkeologisk materiale jo i utgangspunktet ganske så fragmentert og begrenset. Det jo en hel verden av organisk materiale som vi jo dessverre ikke ser. Så likevel da, så omtales jo gjerne da denne tsunami-hendelsen i geologiske artikler og kanskje arkeologiske artikler som a disaster for the Mesolithic Society. Så det en sånn trope som kanskje repeteres uten at man egentlig har gått inn i hva det vil si, hva en katastrofe i et mesolittisk samfunn. I Skottland så har de en artikkel, Waddington's Weeks, som heter Wipeout. Så de ser for seg en sånn samfunnskollaps som da forsterket av denne 8-2-hendelsen og tsunamien sammen. Det medfører da at samfunnet, liksom, dette takler det ikke. Men det jo på en måte paradoks, fordi at vi på den ene siden snakker om de mesolittiske samfunnene som veldig fleksible og tilpasningsnyttige, og på en måte de kan utnytte de nisjene som dukker opp. Men samtidig så sier vi det at nei, de takler ikke klimaendringer og en bølge. Og den bølgen har jo ikke vært like stor overalt. Så, og liksom anta kollaps, det sier kanskje noen ting om hvordan vi forstår det mesolittiske, eller hva forutforståelse som vi bringer inn i våre tolkninger av mesolittikum. Så til nå så har vi altså ikke egentlig funnet noe tegn på at, at tsunamien hadde noe påvirkning på samfunnet. Så for meg så vil jo det kanskje si at det vi er nødt til å spørre oss da, hvordan har man i mesolittikum rigget samfunnene sine til å faktisk kunne klare å håndtere det her og leve med farer, leve med da, denne type hendelser. Hva er det som ligger i det her samfunnene som gjør at de kan overleve? Altså hvordan håndtere samfunnskriser er kanskje da mer det som er vårt prosjekt sitt tema. Så jeg tenker at vi trenger en diskusjon om hva som utgjør en katastrofe i mesolittikum. Og fragmenteringen eller det fragmenterte materialet er en utfordring, men jeg mener at gjennom å spørre litt nye spørsmål til materialet, for eksempel, hva er et robust samfunn? Er endring tegn på styrke eller svakhet ved et samfunn? Er man sårbar eller robust? Så jeg prøver å gå litt ut over da bare det her med å snakke om sånn optimaliserende adferd og hva de spiste, hvor de bodde. Bruke et litt annet rammeverk som er inspirert av science fiction-forskere, samfunnsforskere og fra moderne katastrofeforskning. Så jeg kommer litt inn da på ting som frykt og sorg. Og det ved å gå inn i fenomenet tsunami da, gjennom monstre. Så jeg bruker monster som metode da, på en måte. Og det er jo ikke så ofte man trekker inn den type ting i mesolittikum-forskning da. Så, hva er da et monster eller det monstrøse? Og kanskje når jeg nå snakker om monster, så alle har kanskje et favorittmonster liksom i bakhodet. Men de kulturelle røttene til konseptet monster, det går altså langt tilbake til antikken. Så gjennom historien så har monstre da fremstått i litteratur som filosofiske anomalier. I Roma, i antikkens Roma, så var et monster noe utenom det vanlige. Det var et faresignal. That is, the monster was a deviation from the norm that operated as a warning by showing itself as an exception. Så monstre kan sies å spesifikt spille på det som kan gi sosial angst. Det som kan skremme, det som er utenkelig, uønsket, og det som ligger utenfor sosial kontroll. Monstre kan være konkret farlig når man møter et. Altså, det er ikke trygt. Det kan også representere eller være uttrykk for noen ting som kollektivet misliker. Eller det som kollektivet demoniserer eller marginaliserer. Så det å skape et monster, eller å definere noe som monstrøst, det er det samme egentlig som å skape grenser mellom det normale og det unormale. Så man trenger også det monstrøse for å gjenkjenne det normale. Det unormale kan være fysisk, sånn som mitt favorittfilmmonster. Nå ser ikke jeg så mange skrekkfilmer, men Pans labyrint, det var bare, der fikk jeg mareritt i etterkant. Han har jo da øyne på hender, det er jo ikke helt normalt. Og det kan være noe som ikke kan kategoriseres, altså hvis det er mellom levende og dødt. Altså zombier, monstre. Eller det kan være noe, altså en skapning som består av flere ting, sånn at det er flere kategorier på en gang, sånn som den chimeran der borte. Så den type skapninger, ting, hendelser og også steder, som alle operate outside or on the fringes of normative society, often fall prey to monstering and take on a life in the collective imagination, quite different from its reality. Så det er de to forfatterne som siterte her, de har da jobbet med søppelfyllinger som sånne monstrøse steder. Så et monster altså mer enn det vi kan se. En tsunami mer enn det laget det etterlot. Det mer enn bare det å skulle liksom påvise det i myrer og tjern. Monsterfenomenet og monstrøsitet bruker jeg da som et redskap til å dekonstruere litt denne fenomenet og situasjonen. Så jeg drar i denne videre foredraget her da, parallellen mellom monsteret og tsunamien. Så et monster noe vi kan se, altså det en fysisk ting, en fysisk enhet. Men vi ser også hva monsteret gjør, eller hva det etterlater seg. Og vi kan forske på hvordan folk reagerer på sånne møter med noe skremmende, med det monstrøse, med et monster. Det skrekkelige, det som kan gi sosial angst. Og det kanskje da, og det der å på en måte bryte ned fenomenet, da begynner vi plutselig å se ting som vi kan plukke opp i materialet. Så bølger kan altså være monstre i seg selv. Begrep som monsterbølger brukes jo i filmer eller i artikler, både media og film. Og søker du opp monsterbølger, som jeg gjorde når jeg da skulle illustrere her, så det ganske skrekkinngytende. Bølger, sjø, vær, storm, det gis jo ofte menneskelige egenskaper. Tenk på draugen, som det var bilder på den forrige sliden. Det jo i norsk folketro stormen personifisert. Vi har beskrivelser som at sjøen kan være forræderisk, og på engelsk så snakker vi om rogue waves. Så det altså noe utenfor kontroll. Det finnes også etnografiske eksempler der ånder sies å ta form av bølger for å straffe samfunn. Og det eksempler fra blant annet British Columbia, der både jordskjelv og tsunamier blir forklart som konsekvenser av at ånder eller kjemper slåss og danser. Så det vil si at farlige situasjoner og katastrofale hendelser for samfunn blir forklart som noe ekstraordinært, som noe unormalt. Og et tankesprang, altså det jo ikke så langt fra vår verden heller, før på en måte det unormale og det uforklarlige ble forklart med noe som kom da fra gudene, at man ble straffet av gudene. Det engelske ordet for katastrofe, altså disaster, det fra gammelt italiensk, fra dis astro, som betyr fra stjerne. Så før opplysningstiden så ble altså farer og katastrofer oppfattet som noe som var sendt fra gudene. Så sånn sett så blir det til en sånne historier som man forteller hverandre for å forklare det uforklarlige. Og det med historiefortelling vil jeg komme tilbake til. Så gjør et monster. Vi har jo denne umiddelbare fysiske og konkrete siden. Så monstre bringer død og fordervelse, kaos, ødeleggelser. Og det gjør jaggu tsunami også når man ser på de her bildene her. De her bildene jo da fra de siste i Asia. Og man har sett, altså ikke bare det all infrastruktur og hus og veier og sånne ting, og at tsunamiavsetninger og endringer i topografi kan da midlertidig kvele økosystemer, og da endre forholdene for ressursutnyttelse. Og ikke minst så blir jo mange mennesker drept. Så monsteret da, her tsunamien skaper altså farlige, unormale, ødelagte, dystopiske og rett og slett monstrøse miljø. Og vi ser det jo her, og man har beretninger fra 1700-talls jegersankere i Nord-Amerika som opplevde tsunamier, der de fortalte at når de som overlevde kom tilbake gjennom skogen, så hang da døde mennesker og kroppsdeler i trærne. Så det på en måte, altså når du leser det, så får man jo frysninger på ryggen. Så det jo tatt rett ut av en skrekkfilm. Så det å se eller møte et monster, og oppleve det et monster gjør, eller noe skrekkelig gjør, det vil jo mest sannsynlig gjøre noen ting med folk, med de som opplever det. Så krisepsykologer og katastrofeforskere de har samlet ganske mye kunnskap om hvordan folk reagerer på det å oppleve en ødeleggende naturhendelse som en tsunami. Så vi snakker om mental påvirkning i form av sjokk, traumer, potensielle livskriser, både for de som opplever det, og for de pårørende, de som rundt. I vår tid så snakker vi jo om posttraumatisk stressyndrom og generasjonstraumer. Og det jo heller ikke ting som så ofte blir trekt frem i mesolitikumforskning. Tap av hjem, tap av kjære, livsgrunnlag, det kan medføre da en intens sorgreaksjon og behov for å ta tilbake kontrollen over en situasjon. Så omsatt til handling, da, og omsatt, hvis vi liksom begynner å nærme oss litt sånn det arkeologiske i det hele, omsatt til handling så kan dette komme til uttrykk i en intensifisering av ritualer eller i religiøse følelser. Og i litteraturen, særlig science fiction, så representerer monstre såkalt cosmic horrors. Altså en skrekk som understreker menneskets ubetydelighet, sier de. Men på en annen side så tenker jeg at møtet med et monster også kan underbygge behovet og viktigheten av menneskelighet og medmenneskelighet. Så når du overlever noe så skrekkinngytende som en tsunami, så har vi sett da, i Asia særlig, som det gjort forskning på det siste, at samfunn de kommer sammen litt på tvers av sosiale grupper og sosiale skillelinjer. Det overskrides. Og alle som har sett katastrofefilmer har jo sett hvordan folk i de siste scenene, presidenten i USA særlig, kommer sammen med alle fotfolket og bidrar til å gjenoppbygge landet. I den virkelige verden så det jo ikke alltid sånn. Og om man har brobyggende og kanskje grenseoverskridende adferd rett etter krisen, så det jo ikke sikkert at dette varer utover liksom, det umiddelbare behovet for å redde noen. Men en ting som sikkert, som blir veldig tydelig i møte med farer og monstre, det det at det trygghet i det å være flere. At det å tilhøre en gruppe. Og du del av en gruppe, så du mindre sårbar. Så uttrykk for gruppeidentitet kan da være et fysisk uttrykk for en slags sosial angst for det å være alene. Så kanskje det en forsterking av gruppeidentitet som faktisk et tegn på at det har vært et eller annet monster, at man har møtt et monster eller en tsunami. Man har også sett at etter en katastrofe så et av de viktigste tiltakene, eller noe av det viktigste man gjør, det å samle og dele kunnskap og informasjon om farer. Og i vår tid så har vi jo informasjon om hvordan en bør handle når en tsunami formes, som deles da på ulike plattformer, som på nett eller skilt, filmer og bøker. I forhistoriske samfunn så var sannsynligvis det meste av kunnskapsoverføringen muntlig. Altså, ulike former for historiefortelling vil derfor ha vært en måte å videreformidle kunnskap og det å huske over generasjoner på. Man kan forklare det uforklarlige, man kan gi tips om hva man skal gjøre når noe unormalt eller farlig dukker opp. Hvilken retning skal du løpe når havet kommer som en vegg mot det? En annen ting som man har sett i samfunn som kommer under press, at de kan bli ekstra kreative eller endringsvillige. Så nyvinninger i endring i praksis kan derfor være et resultat av stress, møte med noe ukjent, eller det å forsøke å forberede seg på nye farer. Så presset kanskje møtet med Storeggatsunamien kystsamfunnet til å tenke utenfor boksen. Var det noen ting som endret seg? Monstre og tsunamiens materialiteter går dermed liksom ut over seg selv, ut over bare være det å identifisere at her har det vært en tsunami, så må vi på en måte tenke litt videre da. Vi kan identifisere denne konkrete fysiske ødeleggelsen som den forårsaket. Og så kan vi arkeologisk se etter endring i praksis, i for eksempel intensifisering av ritualer, endring i kunnskapsoverføring, eller skifte i uttrykk for sosial tilhørighet. Ikke sant? Hvis, la oss si da, at Sunnmøre, Nordmøre, det var wipe-out der, så trønderne da plutselig nordover, altså hvis det ikke var noen der å ha kontakt med, så de andre veien, kan vi se om og da Sogn og Fjordane så kanskje sørover I stedet for å gå rundt Stad. Altså, kan vi se den type ting noen ting som vi på en måte har hatt I bakhodet når vi har begynt å studere materialet. Men igjen så det liksom, ok, hva det vi tenker at endring representerer? Hva det? Altså, det ikke alltid at tidspunkt for hendelser og endring sammenfaller, så vi må på en måte også bli enige med oss selv. Hva det vi tror vi ser I materialet? En hendelse som det her kan jo ha vært et slags såkorn som først over tid, når det har liksom blitt vevd inn I myter og historier og på en måte har tatt liksom dramatiske høyder, at det først da det på en måte har fått kraft nok til å forandre på praksis. Ok, så når vi snakker om monster, så har vi altså også en idé om normer og normalitet og baselines. Normalt settes opp mot unormalt, mot anomalier, hybrider, det som skjer I periferien, eller noe som transformeres til det ugjenkjennelige. Og det jo noe som vi kjenner igjen fra arkeologisk forskning. Vi forsøker jo I materialet å identifisere tendenser og mønstre. Altså vi etablerer normer for hva vi forventer å finne innenfor en viss region eller en viss tidsperiode. Og så klassifiserer vi og definerer vi ut ifra det, og så bruker vi det til å klare å gjenkjenne det som bryter med den normen. Så vi på en måte vi går inn I det kjente, og det som vi ikke skjønner, det blir jo da ofte tolket som rituelt. Poenget at vi skaper rammer og fundament som vi bruker til å gjenkjenne avvik. Men med da et mesolittisk materiale, et mellom- og senmesolittisk materiale, som ekstra fragmentert, forstyrret og ukjent, og på mange måter da egentlig I seg selv, unormalt og uregjerlig, så blir det kanskje ekstra vanskelig å etablere sånne fundament og normer. Men jeg tenker at nettopp det å tenke gjennom monstre og bruke monstre som metode, og det å anerkjenne hva skal vi si, monstrenes ontologi, kan vi bruke da til å dekonstruere en sånn hendelse som tsunamien. Og det gir oss redskap til å gripe tak I andre sider ved det mesolittiske samfunnet. Altså sider som da kanskje involverer frykt og sorg. Så det nettopp det Storeggatsunamien-prosjektet prøver å gjøre da, å finne nye måter å bruke tsunamien på, til å liksom knekke opp denne store, lange historien. Det et kjent sånn før-etter-hendelse som vi vet at veldig mange I Mesolitikum delte. Så det blir kanskje et spørsmål om hva vi aksepterer av kunnskap, om den sikker nok, eller det for fragmentert til å bygge verdener av. For det vi gjør, altså det jo litt science fiction I det vi driver med I arkeologi, altså vi bygger verdener I en forhistorie som, ja, så vi tillegger det jo på en måte mye. Så vi forteller historier, og det her kommer tilbake da, til det med historiefortelling. For det å tenke gjennom monstre, det kobles også til worlding practices, I mangel på et norsk godt ord, jeg vet ikke, for historiefortelling kanskje da, som bidrar til å skape, opprettholde og forme verdener. Og det å forklare verden gjennom historier, det altså en måte å forankre verdensbilder eller retningslinjer på hvordan være I verden på. Og det å fylle verden med monstre, det en nødvendig praksis. Det noen ting som vi har sett skje gjennom historien. Du legitimerer en verdensorden eller en sosial kode ved å definere noen ting ut. Og Cohen peker på hvordan monster a condition, episode, person or group of persons that have become defined as a threat to societal values and interests. Så vi vet også at mesolittiske samfunn levde med farer. De levde trolig godt med farer. Tsunamien var sannsynligvis ikke deres første møte med et lunefullt hav, hvordan man skulle oppføre seg på havet, eller når en burde la være å dra på havet, var trolig del av allmennkunnskapen. Så myter og historie, folklore, det må ha blitt delt for å opprettholde verden sånn den skulle være. Og man har kanskje skapt noen bilder som de har brukt, altså sånn som har tatt med noen eksempler på her da. Ikke sant? Vi har Draugen midt på der, som jo personifiseringen av stormen. Møtte du Draugen på havet, så fikk du problemer. I British Columbia så det altså The Giant Thunderbird and Whale, så når de danset eller slåss, så trigget det tsunamier. Så de forklarte da hendelsen gjennom det. Og det kunne også lure da monstre på innsiden av det normale, som disse maskene viser. På 1500-tallet så var det også sånn at man definerte periferi, det man ikke kjente, det ukjente, som farlig og skummelt. Og her var det illustrert på et kart, Arta Marina, fra 1572. Så vi har liksom, og kanskje det å dra det litt langt, men den helleristningen der, som jeg bare har forsterket litt med rødt, var kanskje ikke en historie om en fabelaktig fisketur i Mesolitikum, men kanskje var det en historie om farer i dypet, eller møte med et monster. Altså de her kveitene jo helt skremmende, egentlig. Ok, nå kommer jeg til avslutningen, og i vår Facebook-tid så det jo litt sånn a picture or it didn't happen, så jeg har med en liten modell, en liten GIF, eller det del av en numerisk simuleringsmodell som har fått NGI, altså Norges Geotekniske Institutt, til å lage for oss. Og jeg har fått de til å gå ganske nært på et sted der vi har veldig mange arkeologiske utdragninger, som Leif der bak kjenner veldig godt. Det altså Aukra, Ormen Lange. Og det viser altså Nyhavna, Grunnvika på Aukra, i den sirkelen der. Vi ser her hvordan havet, her tidslinja og høyder. Så vi ser hvordan havet først trakk seg tilbake. I løpet av en time så var det 20 meter ned forbi, og så kom det i løpet av et kvarter, så kom floa og bølgen tilbake. Og dere ser der, det var jo altså utgravninger i området, omtrent der den grønne ligger, og der oppe. Så man ser at, ok, denne dagen, når sjøen ble et monster, så var det mange som, hvis de bodde der da, så ble de berørt. Det jeg ikke i tvil om. Så var det monstre i Mesolitikum? Ja, jeg vil si at på en eller annen måte så var det det. Og det også historier som jeg tenker vi skal fortelle fra fortiden. Ja, så takk for oppmerksomheten. Og her da litt detaljer om prosjektet, hvem som samarbeidspartnere og sånn. Og her noen av de litteraturen jeg har brukt da, til å begynne å tenke rundt monstre. Takk.
Mange takk, Astrid, for et spændende foredrag. Ja, for mig det tredje gang, men det altid lige så spændende, fordi der kommer nye elementer hver gang. Og det bliver spændende at følge, hvad I kommer frem til.
Ja.
Der nogle spørgsmål fra publikum?
Alle veldig redd.
Alle ved alt om Storeggatsunamien. Are there some questions from the chat? Ja, Søren.
Hvorfor heter det Storeggatsunamien?
For det raset som gikk, det var storegga. Altså det en sånn, du har liksom norskerenner som kommer ut med Møte der, og så det den ene ryggen der. Den heter storegga, og det var der det raste. Jeg glemte å si da, men hvis vi skal tenke skala på det raset, så var det omtrent sizen på Rogaland som raste ut. Det 3500 kubikkilometer masse som raste ut, og det påvirket et område som omtrent dekker Nordland, Troms og Finnmark. Altså 95 1000 kvadratkilometer stort. Så det massivt. Det vel det største vi kjenner i verden, tror jeg. Ja, ingen geologer her, så jeg sier i verden.
først vil jeg sige, lag fra denne her, det har vi jo formodentlig afdækket i så langt ned som til Navsdal.
En gang til.
Lag fra den her tsunami har formodentlig afdækket så langt ned som Navsdal, hvor vi har omkring niveauet, hvor vandet stod i den periode, der har vi en halv meter.
Ja.
Blandingslag, som består af grus. Man kan se simpelthen, at landskabet er høvlet fuldstændig af til undergrund.
Ja,
så er det ved at gå op. Det er på vej ind igennem Førdefjorden.
Nettopp.
Og så er det skyllet op af skråningen, og så er det træer og alt muligt med ned igen. Og så er der lejret en halv meter lag med grus og organisk masse, som sikkert er træer, der er rådnet.
Ja.
Så en fuldstændig rydning af landskabet på vej ind af Førdefjorden har det været.
Ja.
Der har ikke været nogen i live efter det.
Nei, sant. Er det en lokalitet som du gro sammen med Kristoffer Hillesland?
Ja.
Ja, for da har han sendt meg den rapporten. Ja.
Det var ret imponerende.
Ja, ikke sant. Ja, så det er jo ikke rart at det er vanskelig å snakke om.
Ja, der stemmes det jo op og det endnu værre.
Ja, det sa også han Sten Bondevik, vi har litt kontakt med han, og han sa da at særlig inne i fjordene, for der ble også sjøen stående og pumpe, liksom, om igjen og om igjen. Og den her giffen fra Aukra, der ser man at havet kommer inn, og så går bølgen litt frem og tilbake mellom øya og fastlandet. Så det blir liksom der du får den effekten. Det er det den modellen skal vise oss, hvor du kanskje får litt sånn ekstra kraftig effekt.
Jeg tænker så på, at du bruger begrebet monster som en litt strukturerende begreb.
Ja.
Og problemet med tsunami er, at du aner jo ikke en fis om det, før det sker.
Nei.
Så beredskab i områder i verden, hvor det er så forholdsvis sjældent som her, der tror jeg ikke, man har nogen som helst erindring om, hvad tsunamier er.
Nej.
Jeg tror også, i løbet af en 1000-års periode eller 500-års periode, så er det forsvundet ud igen.
Det kan det være.
Det er ikke, jeg tror faktisk ikke, det har haft så stor en betydning i virkeligheden, fordi hvor mærkeligt den lyder, altså tusindvis af mennesker blev slået ihjel, ikke? Og som den tsunami, der ramte Sønderjylland og Holland i begyndelsen af 1700-tallet, hvor over 60.000 mennesker døde. Det var alvorlige begivenheder, men sådan i forhistorien, der har de ikke levet længe.
Nej.
Jeg er ikke sikker på, at de har nået at leve så længe, at de har fået en strukturerende effekt.
Nei, det tror jeg nok. Jeg tror jo du for så vidt har rett i det. Jeg tror at altså, det vi gjør med den, når vi bruker tsunamien, så er det både som monster og tsunami er et slags strukturerende element. Men det som vårt prosjekt egentlig som vi har kommet til da, handler om, det er hvordan folk lever med havet, med farene på havet. For stormbølger kan jo også komme. Og det, altså, det kan blåse plutselig opp på havet. Det er det her, hvordan lever du godt med farer, og havet er jo en fare. Bruker ikke begrep som natural disaster, for det er, liksom, det er naturhendelser. Det er ikke nødvendigvis at det var en disaster. Kanskje for enkelte så var det ja, ikke sant. Så, men ja, vi prøver liksom bare altså, ok, her har vi i hvert fall et kjent punkt i en sånn veldig, altså, Mesolittisk er så lang, så det her er et kjent punkt så vi kan da knytte noe før etter til.
Det er en ting med Bergen der.
Ja.
Det er ikke nødvendigvis storm, fordi i tidlige middelalder, der får du en del fortællinger om, vi har dem i Danmark som klabautermanden. Og du har flere ord for det, og du har det som lægreven. De opstår i eftervandet af, at den nordiske asatro, den bliver fortrængt. Og så får du historien om Thor, som bliver fortrængt til havet. Og når du møder klabautermanden eller dragen, så er det Thor, du møder der. Ja. Og han vil ikke noget godt.
Nej, han ville heller ikke noget godt. Thor, dragen.
Så den kommer i hvert fall også ind i det.
Ja.
Det er bare storm.
Ja, ikke sant. Nei, far min er jo fra nordfra. Og familien var fiskere, så de har mange historier om draugen og ja, det å være på havet i storm. Ja, i hvert fall. Men ja, takk.
Okay. Så siger vi tusind tak, Astrid, igen.
Ja, jeg må dessverre løpe om en times tid, men jeg skal høre så mye. Takk, Hans.
Kan jeg få...
Ja, det skal du få.
Ja, det er there are ghosts in the room, I think. Stuff are moving without us deciding. Yeah. Okay, thank you again, Astrid. That was super interesting. And now we are moving forward in time. We will have Meinrad Pohl from the Bymuseet that will talk about, or the name of his talk is "Trust Me, I Am a Doctor, Physicians Experimenting on Patients in the 19th Century." So that sounds absolutely horrible. And of course, we all love it. And just so you know, there will be an exhibition at the Museet that Meinrad is preparing in the spring. So yeah, we're getting a sneak peek. Yeah, we're getting a sneak peek. So I am sharing your presentation. Where is this? Du kan vælge, om du vil have presenter view. Så kan du tage den her på. Ja, man kan have den på sådan en.
Som her. Håper, at jeg ikke ødelægger noe. Tusen takk for muligheten å snakke her i dag og gi et innblikk i vårt arbeid om forberedelsen om en utstilling om 150-årsjubileet av oppdagelsen av lepra-basillen gjennom Gerhard Amauer Hansen. For å øke språkforvirringen i dag, altså jeg kommer og snakker på engelsk. Mitt spørsmål, skal vi snakke på engelsk eller på norsk? Samme, jeg kastet en munn, så jeg snakker på engelsk. Som Solveig allerede har sagt, det er et tema som er skremmende. Altså, det er ikke tilfeldigvis at det er et motiv som er en gjenganger i horrorlitteraturen, altså nok allerede tidlig horrorlitteratur i 1800-tallet og horrorfilmer senere. Anyway, talking about human experiments in the course of development of medicine. Well, Gerhard Amauer Hansen, you may have passed a bust in bronze standing in the park surrounding the museum depicting him. He held a joint position as a physician at the leprosy hospital Pleiestiftelsen for Spedalske nummer 1 and as chief medical officer for leprosy in Norway. And he experimented on a patient, and he got sentenced for abuse of office on the 31st of May in 1880. And as a consequence of this sentence, he forfeited his position as a physician, but he remained in office as a medical officer for leprosy. Lawsuits and conflicts are loved by historians. Why? They do generate sources. And these sources, they provide us with information, but we can also have a lot of questions to these sources. And the questions I try to address today during this talk about a subtopic of our exhibition we are preparing: what had actually happened? What was the reason for Amauer Hansen's experiment? And as a historian, you also always want to see the context, where experiments on patients common practice in the 19th century, and why are these experiments problematic? So we have a glimpse on the medical ethics back then and today. Okay, what happened? Gerhard Amauer Hansen, he experimented on his patient, Kari Nielsdatter Spitsøen, a resident at the leprosy hospital Pleiestiftelsen for Spedalske nummer 1. You can still see this building. It's located on Kalfarveien. If you're going or driving towards Haukeland's hospital, you see it on your right-hand side, or if you're taking the road towards Åsane, just before you enter Fløyfjellstunnelen, also on your right-hand side. So he asked Kari Nielsdatter Spitsøen into his office to conduct a, quote, harmless and pain-free operation on her eye. He punctured the connective tissue of her eye, not the eye itself, as it's often written in the literature, with a cataract needle, Norwegian sternål. And he tried to transfer on her the nodular type or the nodular form of leprosy. I'm coming back to the two forms of leprosy later. But what is actually leprosy? Leprosy is a bacteria infection that can damage the nerves or the skin, but the characteristical damages often ascribed to leprosy, the loss of parts of extremities, are results of secondary infections of unnoticed wounds. You don't feel anything anymore, so you don't recognize the wound, you develop a necrosis, and so on and so on. Contrary to popular belief, this is a disease which is not highly contagious and today can be treated easily with antibiotics. But in the 19th century, leprosy was a big public health problem in Norway. According to statistics from 1852, there were 11 per 10,000 inhabitants in Norway that were affected by leprosy, and in some municipalities in Western Norway, up to 700 per 10,000 inhabitants, if the statistics are right. So what was the reason for this experiment? Why would he do that? And he had the hypothesis that leprosy was contagious and not hereditary. That leprosy was hereditary was the ruling common medical sense of his time, and he wanted to prove that he was right. And how do you prove that? You follow certain rules, you follow certain method, and this method was developed during that time by the physician and microbiologist Robert Koch. And these rules, the Koch postulates, to be very accurate, they were formulated in this form after Amauer Hansen, but in an early form they were known and discussed during the time of his experiment. So first, the microorganism causing a disease must be found in the organisms suffering from the disease, but not in healthy organisms. Then you must be able to cultivate this microorganism in vitro. When inserting this microorganism into a healthy organism, that should cause disease. And if you re-isolate this microorganism from the inoculated person, this has to be the same microorganism that caused the disease in the first part. So, Gerhard Amauer Hansen observed in 1873, while examining a tissue sample of a patient suffering from leprosy, these rod-like, well, yes, entities, microorganisms, and so on. So he discovered the Mycobacterium leprae. So he had fulfilled the first postulate, check, published his results, but now he had to prove that this was actually the contagion. And that is when the problems started. Because he was not able to cultivate Mycobacterium leprae in vitro. You can still not do it, it's just not possible. And it was not possible to verify postulate number 3. He conducted experiments on rabbits, and they all failed. And also previous experiments from the 1850s conducted on humans, they also failed to provoke this infection. And now you may be asking yourself, why am I showing you an armadillo? This is actually the only known species today which can host the leprosy bacteria besides humans. So leprosy is not very contagious, and the scientists were really struggling to cultivate it in vitro and to transfer it onto other organisms. So Amauer Hansen had a problem verifying his hypothesis. So what could he do? And why was he experimenting on Kari Nilsdatter? Well, to understand the experiment, we need to know that one distinguished between two types of leprosy at Ammerhausen's time. The nodular type of leprosy, the type that affected the tissue, and the macular or the neural type of leprosy that affected the nerves. So, if the bacteria cannot be cultivated in vitro, the only way you can get hold of them is to extract them from a patient. And Armauer Hansen had surgically removed a nodule from a patient suffering from the nodular form, so he had the organisms. So to exclude immunity, which was apparently a problem, the test person must already suffer from leprosy to be able to observe the infection of the nodular type, so it must be transferred to a test person suffering from the macular or neural type. Kari Nilsdatter Spissøen was suffering from leprosy, and she was suffering from the macular type, so she was a suitable test person for Armauer Hansen. And according to Hansen's statement of defense during the lawsuit, he said, the development of a nodule would be easily observable in the connective tissue of the eye, and it would be also very easy to remove that, again, surgically. However, the experiment failed. The only consequence or the only result was a painful inflammation. Kari Nilsdatter Spissøen's complaints to the hospital priest and the ensuing law case. And the research had still not made any progress. In his correspondence with Robert Koch, which he quoted in his statement of defense, Koch suggested experiments on animals or humans. And this quote leads to the question if this kind of experiment was common in the 19th century. Well, we start at the very end of the 18th century with one of these famous quoted father figures, the so-called father of vaccination, Edward Jenner. He inoculated a boy, 7 or 8 years old, with cowpox. Cowpox are relatively harmless to humans, and after the boy had overcome the infection, Jenner inoculated him with smallpox to find him immune against smallpox. So what had Jenner done? Jenner had observed that dairy maids, so people working with cows, were immune against smallpox. So his hypothesis was that an infection with cowpox would give an immunity to smallpox. And by inoculating the boy first with cowpox and with smallpox afterwards, he developed a vaccination against smallpox. Another example is the so-called father of modern gynecology, James Marion Sims. He developed a surgical technique to treat damage which was caused by childbirth, but when developing this technique, he experimented on enslaved black women. So they had no possibility for any kind of informed consent. Another of these dubbed father figures, the father of tropical medicine, Patrick Manson, he was researching the life cycle of a certain parasite and the disease this parasite caused. And he exposed his patient Hinlo to mosquitoes to get the blood samples to research the life cycle of this parasite. And these mosquitoes were actually malaria-bearing. The physician Albert Neisser was in search for a vaccination against syphilis, and he injected blood serum from syphilis patients to uninformed patients. And also his experiment was, well, did not have the outcome he expected or hoped for. His patients were all infected by syphilis, but he explained it away by the occupation his patients had. They were all prostitutes in treatment for other reasons. The island of Molokai was the site for a settlement that was used to isolate persons affected by leprosy. And the resident physicians, Fitch and St. Moritz, as well as a visiting physician, Arning, they conducted numerous experiments on the residents of Molokai. We are talking about, well, some hundred. And also the most eminent authority on the field of leprosy, Daniel Cornelius Danielsen, chief physician on 2 hospitals in Bergen, he had also conducted some experiments. He had experimented on himself, he had experimented on a caretaker and a nurse, but all those people were informed and they gave his consent, and his aim was to show the contrary, that leprosy was not contagious. And also Johann Lauritz Biedenkap, university teacher and chief medical officer of Christiania, nowadays Oslo, he was consulted as a medical expert during the lawsuit against Hansen, and he also referred to his experiments with leprosy on his patients. But also here we can assume that these patients gave their consent. So, if everybody is doing it, must be okay, right? Well, no, of course not. All these experiments give us an insight about ethical dilemmas, but also into medical ethics today and back then. All the experiments quoted have in common that the test persons belonged to a vulnerable group and that there was a class difference between physician and test person. The test person of Jenner was a child. The test persons of Sims enslaved black women. The test persons of Neisser were prostitutes. The test persons of Fitch, Moritz, and Arning, residents of an isolation settlement. And the test person of Manson and Hansen were their patients. So all of the above-named physicians can actually be accused of abuse of power. And all of the experiment violated the primary principle of medical ethics, primum non nocere, firstly, do no harm, ascribed to the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates, but they were known and considered valid in the 19th century. All of the experiments also have in common that they lacked the informed consent by the test persons. Well, now we could argue, well, informed consent, that is a modern ethical concept dating back to the Nuremberg Code of 1947 or to the Helsinki Declaration of 1965. But also this concept was known and discussed during the 19th century. The question, did these tests improve the conditions of the test person? Well, sometimes you try a cure, you try to help your patient, and sometimes it helps, sometimes it does not help. Well, in the above quoted cases, one could argue that Jenner and Sims improved the conditions of the test persons, in Sims' case, at a high personal cost. And all these experiments reveal what is the so-called trolley problem. Is it ethical, defensible, is it feasible to sacrifice the few to save the many? And this is a common dilemma in public health work. And in all of the above-mentioned cases, one could argue that the experiments themselves reveal the mindset of the scientists who conducted them. So in this mindset, the personal well-being of the patients was subordinated to the scientific progress and the collective utility. And even Hansen, in his case, he wrote in his statement of defense that it was justifiable that the test person should suffer a bit, but he would not infect her with a new disease, and the experiment was of high scientific and national importance. So, once again, these experiments show the general dilemma when working with public health, individual versus collective. But generally speaking, we can say all the mentioned experiments were and are objectionable. Well, but what Hansen did right in his statement of defense, he was supported by his colleagues. All these colleagues said, well, the experiment itself, it's not worth talking about. The only problem is that the patient, the test person, was not informed about the aim, about the objective with the experiment. And that was maybe also the reason why Hansen only was sentenced for misuse of office and not for personal injury. Well, to sum up, Hansen wanted to prove his theory that leprosy was contagious. He tried to do so with experimenting on a patient, following scientific rules, the Koch postulates. And he was not the only physician experimenting on patients. The experiments on patients reveal certain dilemmas, but are nonetheless objectionable. What I presented now here today is not my research, my sole work. It's the work of our team and also based on valuable advice of the Academic Advisory Council. As mentioned before, we are working on an exhibition on the discovery of the leprosy bacteria, and the exhibition will hopefully be opened in May next year at the Lepramuseet St. Jürgens Hospital. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope I will see you at the exhibition. Thank you.
Thank you, Meinrad. Yeah, very horrible things. Yeah, it's good to talk about these things, but it's very hard on the thank you. It was. I think we all will see the exhibition. Are there any questions, or are you a little shaken by the whole? Yes, Ramona. Thanks.
That was really interesting. I think it is indeed extremely important that we have such places to go and discuss all these issues, because we've just gone through it and it won't go away. But I also just like when you said all it cost this first female patient was eye infection. I'm still stuck on what happened. Do you know if she got healed? Did she lose her eye, or was that ever discussed?
Well, yes. So the patient, she got an inflammation in the connective tissue, and that was the reason for her to complain to the hospital priest. And the inflammation, it vanished after a certain time. So from this kind of injury, she was healed, but she was not infected by the nodular form. So this experiment, did not bear any fruits, happily. And she died, I think, some 3 or 4 years after as a resident in St. Jürgens Hospital. She was transferred on her own wish from Pleistiftelsen to St. Jürgens Hospital.
Yes, before, when you ask the question, can you repeat it in the microphone? Or because people on Zoom don't hear.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
When you ask the question, can you repeat it for the people online?
Yeah, short question, please.
Do we know why the test people weren't infected if it is an infectious disease?
Well, that is a very good question. Why did the test persons not get infected? Well, the point is, to get infected by leprosy, you need to have a very weak immune defense. So where we have in these areas which were so badly affected by leprosy, we have areas that were suffering from poverty, malnourishment, and so on and so on. So you have really to fulfill certain prerequisites, a bad immune defense, and be more or less constantly exposed to the bacteria to contract the disease. And then it could take months, even years to develop it. Even if you contract the bacteria, if you're a host of the bacteria, it does not necessarily mean that you will get the disease. And that is the problem when trying to prove if it's contagious.
Thanks for a great talk. Did we have contact with students or with the patients after his sentence at any point, or?
Well, officially not, because he was not a practicing physician anymore. He had an administrative job to being the chief medical officer of leprosy, but he had, well, say, limited contact with the patients. He also advocated the transfer of Kari Nilsdatter Spissøen from the Plejestiftelsen to St. Jørgens Hospital. So he signed her application and advocated it. But he was not treating patients afterwards, at least not officially.
And we do have one question from the live stream, but it's a bit unclear what they mean. They asked, so it's Ivar Jode who asked, what happened with other experiments in Norway? Maybe, I don't know whether you can understand the question.
Well, were there other experiments in Norway? Well, the ones I know of, the very few. So Danielsen, he conducted the experiment on caretaker, a nurse, in the hospital, but he wanted to prove that leprosy was not contagious. So the information he gave the test persons was, of course, something completely different, and the tests were all negative. And according to the letters of Biedenkap, when he was experimenting on his patients, and he just tried to transfer nodules from one place on the body to another place, and he didn't succeed with that either. So there were no consequences for these experiments, but here we can assume, or we even know, that there was informed consent by the test persons. If there had been other experiments, I don't know.
So Ramona first, and then
I just wondering, when you had access to some of those documents, right? And some of those physicians who were actually trying to do something to help a larger group, landscape. Do you read a bit on the scruples, or have you not found those kind of more personal notes? Have you found a case for any one of those people that you have some information where they are actually sort of struggling with themselves? Has it been found some sort of struggle documentation?
Well, I have to admit I did not go into detail with the examples I presented to provide the context for Armø Hansen. So Armø Hansen, he was apparently a firm believer in progress, in science, and he had this, apparently, he was convinced that it was okay if some people should suffer for the greater good. So a very utilitarian approach. However, in later letters, he also states, well, we can't experiment on humans. So this lawsuit had apparently made an impression on him, even though he doesn't mention it in his own biography.
We can repeat the question when she asks it.
Yeah.
It's more of a comment question, actually, because you were talking about the question whether it was hereditary or contagious.
Mm-hmm.
And for us today, it sounds maybe a bit strange to wonder about that. But as you said, you know that it's contagious, but very low contagious. And it seems to have been running in certain families because of this, because you need this constant exposure. So that's probably one of the reasons that the hereditary thing was an actual hypothesis at some point, I guess, because you could have generations in the same family with the same disease, and they were sort of shunned by the community around because of this. But the truth was actually that because of this constant exposure in the family, they were also contagious. Yeah, got it from their parents, but not hereditary. So I think that's it's important to remember why they actually asked this question, or why this was the theory, and why he wanted to prove that you could actually get it from other people outside the family. But it wasn't that easy in reality, because you needed the constant. So that's probably one of the reasons why this was a theory in the beginning.
Well, of course, you're absolutely right. It was not easy. And that one even started to deal with leprosy in a scientific way was not that many years ago. It was Danielsen who was the leading authority on leprosy. And he actually firstly described the disease, separated it from other diseases with similar symptoms, and, well, that it was hereditary, that what was at his time the best explanation they had, of course. And when Hansen entered, well, it's an anecdote, when Hansen entered Danielsen's office, he said, well, you're wrong. It's contagious. And, well, Danielsen was not very amused, but Hansen had a hard time proving it was contagious. Yeah, absolutely. I have to ask you to speak a bit louder because I don't hear.
I visited this museum on a guided tour.
Yeah.
And where I come from, in Svenja.
Yeah.
I actually recognized a lot of the last names. So a lot of, well, my local community and across the fjord did have this sickness. But I was just wondering how they said, like, how did leprosy kind of like go away? Because if you had these smaller communities who had a higher exposure over a certain amount of time, do you know, like, how did it go away, considering it is something that stays in your, like, it stays in your body your whole life? Well, like, you can cure it until now, like we have medicine now, but do you know how it would go away naturally?
How does leprosy go away? Well, if we are talking about the personal level, it is possible to be healed by your immune defense if other factors are applying. Please don't ask me about the details. Nowadays, it can be cured with antibiotics. How all these antibiotics are, I don't know. I don't know when we have drugs for a cure for leprosy. I'm sorry, I cannot answer that. The interesting question is, how did leprosy go away in this community? And that is actually subject to dispute. Because leprosy is contagious, or Hansen was convinced that it was contagious, he advocated isolation. The infected persons must be isolated to protect the community from the disease. And after certain laws were passed on isolation of persons affected by leprosy, the infection rate went down. But on the same time, also the general living conditions improved. So now it is an open question, was it due to the isolation or was it due to the improvement of the general living conditions? And nowadays I think we are a bit more biased to say they are the general living conditions, because isolation was not applied that strictly as the laws wanted to. There are certain anecdotes how the local communities did avoid isolation. So it can be either isolation or it can be the improved living conditions.
I have a comment. I think it's either Danielson or your guy who is actually buried in front of the museum entrance. Yeah, she should be lying there in a brass urn. And one of the conic section had a plan that we should go out and find him, take him metal detector and find him again. So if you want him back for the exhibitions, we should go and find him again.
I'll take
Is
you.
it Danielson or is it your guy?
Well, I think for Danielson, it's not quite sure where he is buried. And I think Hansen is actually buried at the foot of his own bust.
It's got to be Danielson.
So I think there's also this this anecdote about the first cremations in Norway, because they were forbidden, and both Danielson and Amager Hansen, they were advocates of cremation. So there is this anecdote about some physicians traveling all the way to Göteborg to get the Danielson into a crematory and get the urn back to Bergen. And it could be Danielson.
We'll find him and we'll ask him.
Okay, maybe it's a whole other talk, but how much do we know about how leprosy came to be widespread in Europe and so on? From like, I guess you can see it in skeletons sometimes, but also in genomics now you can detect it as far as I know. How much do we know? Like, how it happens?
I have to agree, this is a completely different talk. I'm sorry.
Okay, are there any questions online? No? Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Oh.
Okay, Svenja, are you with us? Yes. Okay. So now we are. Okay, I'm waiting.
If you just want to introduce Svenja and then I'll shut off the microphone so we don't have a...
Yeah. Okay. No.
Yes, 1 second. There we go.
Yes, we'll need to give a round of applause to the technical team here, because they're doing amazing work, which I'm not touching anything of this because I will destroy it or throw it out the window. So thank you both, Matthias and Rebecca, because yeah, you are amazing. Now we are having our last talk, so we go a little back in time again. We are having Svenja Weise, who is an anthropologist at the Department of Forensic Medicine at the University of Southern Denmark. And she will talk about a find that at least us Danes have heard about, and hopefully you have as well. So it is the possible witch in the neighborhood, a curious grave find on Fyn. Svenja, I give you the...
Yes. So can you hear me? That's
Yes.
the first and most important question, I think.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, great. Yes. Okay. So thanks for having me. I'm not only an anthropologist, I also have a master in archaeology. I studied pre and early history and biological anthropology at the University of Hamburg before I did my PhD in forensic anthropology. And I had the pleasure, I have to say, and usually I'm working in the university and don't have much time out. But in 2020, I had the chance to dig a grave for a local museum who sometimes calls us to come out and help them with digging up graves. And I have to say, this was a bit the gift that didn't stop giving in the beginning. So I'd like to, it's very different from the talks before. You're not going to hear a lot of scientific results. But want to walk you through this excavation because I think it fits very well to a Halloween topic, and I hope you enjoy it a bit. And as you can see, I'm already gone wild with pumpkins here. The thing I'm thinking about, we had the grave of a very young woman with some strange grave goods, and the possibility was discussed if she could be a kind of Völve, or which with the Völve as a kind of pre-station to witches. So we know about wise women from the Nordic countries that have already been described in some Roman sources. And we have, especially in the Edda sagas, we have the Viking seers and sorceresses. So these were women, usually a bit older according to the sagas, who were very powerful. They were not evil like we associate with witches often nowadays. They had very high social status, and they were the ones you could ask for help. One of the things they could do was that they could perform sight, a kind of magic that is closely related to shamanism, and where they would sing or with help of drugs go into a trance and have some kind of out-of-body experience and which that we see in the later medieval sources. The archaeological traces we can find of Völve, and there are quite a few around Scandinavia, is that they are predominantly female graves, with, as the National Museum of Denmark puts it, rare and strange things in them. And I think that also is quite fitting for the grave I'm going to present you today. There are some typical combinations, like they often have a wand, a kind of staff on with them. They often have drugs or seeds that can be hallucinogenic. And they often have a collection of smaller things like stones, bird bones, shells, urchins, things that could be used to kind of predict the future. Usually these graves also have signs of the high status I mentioned before, like they have very fine clothes in the graves. They have some foreign goods, like the example here in Denmark often have some kind of Roman bronze kettles with them, or they have horse equipment, or they are buried in a horse cart without wheels. It's a grave that has been excavated very early in the around 1935, I think. And this lady had glass beads, Roman bronze artifacts, plants that were considered exotic or seeds for them because they cannot be found on the island in natural circumstances. And she had these kind of little amulets. She had a shrine standing at the bottom of her coffin, at the bottom of her feet. And the same is true for the lady from Fyrkat, who also had a shrine at the bottom of her feet. She had very rich clothes in funny blue and red and with gold thread woven into them. She was lying in a horse cart without wheels, and she had the small bones and henbane seeds. Henbane is a plant if you smoke or if you can burn them a little bit and they start smoking, that can have hallucinogenic effects. So when I found this grave of a young woman with some strange grave goods, it was worth thinking about if she could be a witch or not. This excavation was officially run by Ostfyns Museet. I'm working at the university, but sometimes, as I said, when the museums have special graves, they ask us to come out. It was a very long stretch that was excavated. You can see it here around the island of Fyn as a red bar, and it is a very small trench, but very long, because the whole area where the Baltic pipe should lie should be excavated. The whole thing, at least in my area here, was running from February to December 2020, and the grave find that was pretty unexpected because there are no other graves in the area, came in November 2020, so relatively at the end of this excavation period. And it's from the little village of Skellerup. So here you can see an arrow where around it should be. It's very close to the motorway. I put the skeleton in here. It's of course not a giantess, even if this is a Halloween talk. But you can see she's lying very close to the church, to the nowadays church, and the kind of stripe you can see going across the meadows there, that is really where the excavation for the Baltic pipe was. And she's orientated very much with east-west, so with her head to the east. When I was called was that they were pretty much gone on with the excavation. They were thinking they would close down soon. And suddenly they had this big area that was kind of miscolored, and they took a mini bugger across it to lay a trench. And when the mini bugger had gone across it, then unfortunately somebody realized that this here at the bottom could be human bones and that there was a skull to see. So this is the situation at the time when I was called to come and have a look if we can do something about the bones. As you can see, it's pretty badly preserved. Very often bones are badly preserved here on Fyn because we have very heavy clay as ground, but you can also see that the mini bugger didn't help. What you can see at the bottom of the picture, this area with the darker stains, that is a kind of cooking pit, or at least something where we found coal, where there had been a fire, where we found animal bones. So it could be that this is a later kind of addition to and not related really to the grave. After we cleaned it up, here you can see the dark area would have been on the lower right hand of the picture, and it's not there anymore. So it was very shallow compared to the rest. And after we dug for a while, we could see that she was lying on, the situation became clear, and we could see that she was lying on her left-hand side. Her arms were lightly folded up, and that's a problem now because the mini bugger went right through the arm and rib area. So we don't have any arm bones left. We have this tiny bit of humerus that you can see there, but the underarms are gone completely. And her legs were bent up. So the hole that they dug for her was relatively small for her body. So she's kind of folded up, that the pelvis is lying lowest, and that the head and upper part of the body and the legs are kind of folded upwards. But one thing she has that is interesting is where the little arrow points, there is a kind of metal necklace or little pendant made from metal. You can see it's very close to the lower jaw and to the upper part of the humerus. So it would have been something that would have been very close to her neck. And on the pictures, in the close-up, you can see it's a kind of bear lock. It looks like a kind of bear lock. So it was something that had several rings around it and was from the diameter maybe 1.5 centimeters. Unfortunately, I never saw the whole thing excavated because what we did, the archaeologists took it out as a block. So it has never been really, I've never came closer to it than the pictures you see here. The other thing she had was she had a clay pot standing in front of her hips, in front of her pelvis, or slightly on top of her pelvis, that she nearly seems to hold with the arms. But again, this is something that the archaeologists took out as a block to preserve it, so I've never seen how the thing really looks. But there's one thing, and that is a kind of mystery thing you can see here in the yellow circle. It's my first mystery bone, as I tend to say, because I was digging and slowly I understood how the person was lying, but that was weird down there. It didn't seem to have the shape of a human bone, at least. And so we went deeper, tried to leave the upper part of the body as it was and just go deeper around the feet area. And the amazing thing is this was a horse head. So that was pretty exciting for me, at least. I've never dug anything where a horse head was. And as you can see, it looks very, very intentionally deposited there over the leg. So what you can see is basically, you see the upper leg, the right leg on the upper side, and then you see a part of the lower leg lying below that, and you can see that this horse skull is really kind of nearly looking like it's biting into her leg. So here it is from a different perspective, and you can see how much it really encompasses the whole shin. So this is kind of the middle of the shin, you can see there. And if you see the picture on the right, you can see how much she was actually folded up, because I think if you see the other pictures, it always looks like she was lying pretty flat in the ground, and she wasn't. So here you really get an idea about how the three-dimensional look of it would be. And you can see the horse skull here that's kind of grabbing over the leg. And when we thought we were really done, we were working with 3 persons at the same time. So one of the archaeologists was taking out the artifacts. One of the archaeologists was just trying to empty more area around the horse skull. I thought, okay, now we take this thing up. The whole excavation, when we started it, I said it would take a day or maybe 2. And already with the horse head, we got pretty much slowed down because we wanted not to destroy it and take it up as carefully as we could. And then very close to her pelvis, so basically between her pelvis that you can see on the top and the block with the gips around you can see on the bottom, there were some other bones that looked kind of strange and that definitely didn't look human. So we were not done with the sensations, obviously. What we found when I dug deeper was that we had a whole dog lying below her. So she was buried on a dog. So her pelvis was kind of on the dog and part of her lower spine and part of her legs. But the center was really on the dog of her pelvis. And over her was this kind of horse skull. So what is this? Well, that was the moment when really everybody said, oh, we have a witch, we have somebody where all these kind of things fit, but we don't have the rich equipment on the other side that we would expect with that. From the dating, we also had to accept that it was not Viking Age, which was the first assumption that we really would have a Viking Age Völve. But it's from the C14 data, it's early Germanic Iron Age, so we are talking migration period here. But that fits well with the bear lock. So the bear lock is really a kind of jewelry that is very typical for the time. And when I had her back into my lab, I did the real anthropological analysis, and she was a young woman between 22 to 25 years old. She looked very healthy, apart from the fact, of course, that she was dead, but she had no signs of trauma, or she didn't have any kind of the severe infectious diseases we usually expect to see. So she had a bit of a possible infection with tuberculosis. I analyzed that after the scheme by Dagmar Pedersen, where 6 sites are scored usually, and only 2 of these 6 sites I could see everything, and only 2 of these 6 were positive, but they were positive for a possible infection at least. She had very good teeth. She was very young, so all molars were fully erupted. There's no caries. It's hardly abraded at all. But she had a very large amount of calculus. And that is something where we hope that in the future it might us give a little more information. There is a team of forensic chemists here in Denmark that tries from calculus of modern drug users to see which kinds of drugs they were using. And they agreed that they would, for us, do a kind of test if this would also work with historical bones. So we're going to provide them when they have time with a little bit of the calculus, and they are going to try to find out for us what kind of drugs this lady, if she took some natural herbs or whatever, if we can find something, or if we can see that will be our test about it. So did we really find a witch? I don't think so. We found some of the rare and strange things. At least for me, it is pretty strange to have a horse head and a dog in a grave. But the silver pendant and the clay pot are typical for the time period, so that is nothing to be super excited about. And we certainly do not have the exceptionally rich finds. And we also do not really see the kind of small trinkets or amulets that would indicate sight, this kind of trance and looking into the future. So there's nothing that indicates that she could have been a seeress. She also doesn't have a wand, which seems to be one of the significant finds you would expect to see. On the other hand, if I see some of the reconstructions of the graves of the Wölver we have seen, it's very often that these little trinkets are in the area of the upper arms, that they are holding a little bag in their hands or having it lying on their breast. And that is exactly the area where the minibugger went through. So if there was something, it could have as well been just dug away by the machine. So unfortunately, I cannot present you really with a Wölver, but I still think it was a very interesting grave to dig. And while we have these extraordinary grave goods, we are really missing everything that would be typical for having one. The idea that I had a bit was if she could have been a witch apprentice, if she could have been one of these young girls traveling with a witch. This is really highly, wildly speculative, and I allow myself to do that because this is supposed to be a Halloween talk. But usually I wouldn't write this down anywhere, I think. But yes, it was one of the more extraordinary graves we have here on Fyn, I think. So in that sense, I'm looking forward to see if there's more coming in the same direction in the future. So thank you for your attention. That was my talk. And I hope it brings you a bit in the Halloween spirit. Hello, hello,
Yes.
hello.
Yes, Svenja, do you hear me?
Now I can hear you, yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, we'll have a bit of feedback. Maybe just a bit far away.
If I go.
You know, that's not going to help.
Everybody has a question. They have to come close. I'm very sorry that I missed the discussions before.
Maybe I can ask them here.
Yeah.
Yes, I can
That's
hear you.
still a bit of fear.
We hear a lot of feedback.
I also hear a lot of feedback, but I can hear you at least.
Yeah. We'll try and see how it goes.
Actually, use this baby and then mute that on. And then.
Halloween than I expected to be honest.
You talk.
Okay. Thank you. No, thank you, Svenja. It was really interesting, and your PowerPoint was absolutely amazing. The whole pumpkin. Yeah, and it was nice to see this great find from Fyn. I'm sure the audience has some questions. Yes, Ramona has one for you, Svenja.
Can you give the microphone to
Yeah. Svenja, I'm gonna hand out the microphone around. I hope you can hear us, so you can get some questions.
Is this going to do a lot of feedback now?
Just speak.
Hi, Svenja, and thank you very much for your very interesting talk. I'm asking just because one of us is going to ask, but there is just no chance that the backfill of this bugger was available for sieving. Otherwise, I guess you would have told us.
It was really so unexpected, and it was really that they just called us more or less. Could that be bones at all? And when that happened, and I could really get out to the excavation, it was a few days later. So unfortunately, no sieving was done. And as I said, they didn't expect to find any graves in that area. We found some 100 meters further down the trench later on, or they actually found it while I was digging up the other one, but that was a completely different time period. So it's not that it would be a known area for graves. So that's why nobody really thought about that.
Okay, more questions? in the room?
Hi Svenja, thank you for a great talk. If you should maybe just talk about what speculations other people have made on how far back these elements of witches or whatever we want to call them. Do you know how that would? What have people said about this topic early on than this?
I looked up a bit in the literature, but really not much more than a very superficial search, because my job, and this is really the biology and not the anthropology, not the archaeology of the finds. So that is something where I'm sure the real archaeologist who was doing the excavation could give a lot better answers about. From what I saw is that that the kind of, or where we certainly know, or where we can read about this kind of which lady sorceresses is in the. We just had the exhibition here at Museum where they about the Viking Rus, the kind of people going over via the eastern area, the Vikings, and that they had some women with them. There is a description of some Islamic writer who describes a very horrible funeral where lots of young ladies get killed in the process by an elderly lady in a white dress. So she's considered to be one of these Völver, really. But how far it goes back in time, I would guess really, really long way, because just my personal assumption is that people really try to find, to ask the spirits for help for a very long time. I think that's a deeply human trait, simply, but I couldn't answer that.
I think I can help you a little bit there. If we talk about witches, it doesn't really, as you said yourself, it doesn't really mean that much to prehistory, at least not from a Germanic point of view, maybe from a Roman point of view. But if we're talking about people having knowledge about medicine and things like that, we do have a lot of graves in Denmark that tell us about this. From Vesthimmerland, you have several graves from the Roman Iron Age where the buried people, they must have been involved in some kind of medical health care. And you do have you talked about Moesgaard, you do have the Bronze Age grave at Moesgaard that's in the exhibition where you have a lot of artifacts. And I think you have several graves from the Bronze Age showing that women had these positions. And, you know, if you go further back in time, you have graves that are interpreted as shamans. It must be the same function, and they go as way back to the Hamburgian culture. So I think it's a rather common thing in prehistory, actually.
Yeah, that would fit to what I expect, at least. I'm not surprised about that at all. Mm-hmm. The funny thing is it also goes up to now, because we just talked about this here over lunch, and our secretary said that there's still this kind of wise woman living on the island that are considered to be alternative healers. So it's not that they try to kind of, it has nothing new agey about it. It's really kind of simply a tradition of old, very down-to-earth people otherwise, who obviously claim knowledge that is kind of based on nature medicine, if I can say that.
Hello. Okay, so I know that we can't really know, but if you were going to guess, what would you say was the reason she was buried with a horse head and a dog?
That is something I really wouldn't speculate on, because otherwise I come into this realm where archaeologists say it's Celtic, and that's what we have no idea what we're really looking at, I think. So I certainly think it's Celtic, because I have no reason, or I have no idea what else it could be. But no, I really can't speculate about it.
There is a question from our watchers in YouTube. It's in Danish, though. Yeah.
will translate the Danish.
Just ask it in Danish.
Oh, yeah. Did the pot have something inside of it?
Not that I would know of, but since it was brought to the conservatory, I never saw the finished archaeological report. I never asked for it. Usually my job is really, I dig up the bones, I write my part of the anthropological report, and that is collected by the responsible archaeologist. So she will have the real data, what is in the pot, and I never asked to see it, really. I have to say I should have done that. The invitation to give a talk here came last week, so it was kind of on too short notice in a too busy day to really give a talk in full detail, as I would have liked to do when I would have had a bit more time to prepare myself.
Hi, I was wondering about the calculus on her teeth and what kind of information that might give.
That is very weird in the sense, at least, that usually we only see calculus if teeth don't get used, but she must have eaten something. And I do not really know how she managed with a full set of teeth to get that much calculus in the first place. It's very unusual. But what we really hope to see from it is that, as I said, it's forensic chemists who use it on modern day drug abusers to see what kind of drugs they had. So it's kind of like somebody would cut off a lock of your hair and try to find out what kind of substances you were using. They try to do the same with calculus. And their assumption is at least that if it is a kind of plant substance that is hallucinogenic, that they could still find out about it. They wanted to have a list of what we think what could be used in the past, and pentane is one of the typical things that could be working in that direction. And so they're going to try to find out which kind of stopper they can assume or expect to find, and they're going to test for that. But they said they would do that after the summer holidays, and up to now they didn't have time to do it. So that's something where I really hope we would get a result out of it. It would be very interesting if there's any remains left.
Svenja, I don't know, where you are with the sort of more specialized analysis or the team, but do you have, and maybe you have mentioned it, and I just didn't, I don't remember, but do you have a good idea of whether there will be a whole sort of isotope and maybe a DNA analysis done, or is there money for that?
It's not in the project. The project was one of these kind of commercial excavations due to the pipe. And what they are paying for is really to get everything up and document everything. They're not going to pay for further analysis. So that would be something where we would need to find more money, or somebody who would do it for free, which we sometimes have. But as far as I know at the moment, there's nothing planned.
And we have another question from the YouTube watchers. Has there been any interpretations regarding the state of her teeth?
No. Her teeth are perfect apart from the calculus. Okay. So there is actually nothing very unusual about the teeth at all.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Svenja. I think there are no further questions. It was super interesting. Thank you very much for, as you said, such a short notice. It was really well, very good presentation.
Thank you. I'm happy that I saw, well, at least the second one. I didn't get enough out of the first one because my Norwegian is actually non-existing. But I'm certainly coming to Bergen and will see the leprosy exhibition. I'm very sure about that. So for me, that was an interesting part of it as well. We're doing a lot of leprosy research in my institute, so that would be perfect to see the museum.
send us an email when you are here. We will welcome you very much, everyone, both Meinrad and us at the department and at the museum. So just send us an email and we'll be here all cheering you.
Thank you. I will. I'm a person who comes back to these kind of offers. Thanks a lot.
Super. We'll see you for a beer or something.
We will. That sounds like a really good idea. Well, have a nice evening. I'm zooming out here now because we have our university yearly party, so I'm already late for dinner. But yeah, thanks a lot and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good party. Okay. So thank you, everyone, both the ones physical and online. And see you next time for next week for our next seminar. Have a good Halloween and be scared.